Now joined by TSN's Dave Naylor. Dave, good to have you on the show.
Great to be here.
A Carleton grad from the vaunted journalism program. After you've had this route that's gone through newspapers to television, covering all sports, how did you end up landing on football? Is it because it's your passion? Is it because it's where the road took you? How did you end up covering this sport and being the TSN insider?
Part of it was when I came into the business in 1991, everybody seemed to be wanting to do baseball or do hockey. And football just kind of came the sport that fell into my lap. And, I recognized a few things about it very early. One was it was, to me, the most meaningful sport when you're talking about covering games. Every game has a meaning in football. The way people come to football, there's so much variety in that. People who play it all their lives, people who come to it late, people who come to it from tough backgrounds, people who come from it from wealthy back. I mean, it's just a football locker room is one of the most diverse places, both in terms of backgrounds and storytelling that you can find. And when I look back, Jim, I think I kind of had a leaning towards football maybe earlier than I thought. And I should be clear, I never played the game. My high school didn't have a team. I probably wouldn't have made it if they did. But I did. And you mentioned I did have a journalism degree from Carleton. My honors project was a 23-minute television documentary on a semi-pro football team called the Ottawa Bootleggers, which was made up mostly of Carleton and Ottawa U guys who aged out of university ball, and they were playing four-down football in the semi-pro circuit in the United States, and actually competed for the national title, I guess the international title, in the fall of 1981 in Ottawa at Lansdowne Park against the Racine, Wisconsin Raiders. And so that was kind of my background while I was in school. And then when I got into the business, it was just kind of the opportunity that opened up for me. And from there, my first job in broadcast was in Regina, Saskatchewan. I was the CBC radio reporter in Regina in 1994 and 1995. And guess what was the number one beat there every single day? It was CFL. It was football. And it was a real privilege to cover football in a market like Regina. I often joke when people say, what's the biggest story you've ever covered in your career, 30 plus years? I say, probably the day that Ray Yawk put Dave Ridgway on the practice roster. It was massive story in Regina because he got into a snit with an extremely popular kicker and player in that community. But that just from there, it just kind of took off from there, and I've absolutely loved and been very, very privileged to make my living for as long as I have in a sport that I never played.
In the conversations that I've had with you about college football, it seems that you've got a special place in your heart, or you're passionate about college football. Why so passionate about college football? And tell me a bit about some of the journeys that you've gone on to find stories over the last couple of years around the college game, especially associated with the Canadians.
I just find the hunger and the passion and the dedication at the collegiate football level to be so enticing. There's just nobody takes a play off. There's no meaningless games. Everybody, I think, understands from the moment they start playing college football that they're kind of on the clock individually as well, because it's not a sport that you can play for 10 years. It's not a sport where you can be really, really good and be stuck behind somebody. So when your opportunity comes along, you've got to really pursue it. And I think one of the things that I'll speak to the NCAA example for a moment. There is an incredible consistency when we visit college campuses about the Canadian kids that play Division One. I mean, you'd almost think they were brought up in the same households, because it's these guys came here incredibly hardworking. These guys never caused any trouble. Our coach said, if I had 90 guys like X, my job would be so easy. They're also really good with the media. There's just a humility about them. And I've always kind of wondered, well, why is that? And I think part of it's two things, I think. One, I think when you grow up as a hockey player in Canada, not to besmirch hockey, but you can be treated pretty specially by the time you're 12, 13, 14 years old. In your community, you're a big, big deal. I don't think football players get that kind of treatment at that age. You're more anonymous. You're working in the shadows. And the other thing about it is, particularly with the NCAA, there's not one path. I'll use hockey again. I kind of describe it as a conveyor belt sport, right? The conveyor belt will carry you from Pee Wee to the NHL draft. You really don't have a lot of decision making to make in that. There's a pretty well worn path, particularly in this country. But in football, every player invents their own road. Every player figures it out on their own and comes a different way. And so by the time they arrive at that level, I think they really value the opportunity that they've achieved because they know what a long shot it is to get it. But I remember even like so many examples, just one that pops into my head. We were in Champaign, Illinois about 2 years ago this time. And it was right when Chase Brown was getting a lot of love for the Heisman Trophy. And, Sid was about to pop the second half of that season. He was certainly still seen as a guy who was going to get drafted, but he really exploded the second half of that season. And we were taping our stand-up for SportsCenter at the end of the day, right in front of like a statue outside the stadium or the admin building. And as we're doing it, the media relations guy who had helped us earlier in the day was leaving for the day. And as he walked by us, set up with our tripod and lights there, he just looked at it and said, hey, thanks for everything. The guy said, hey, you send us two more like Chase and Sid, you can go back anytime you want. Like it was, and I remember a similar thing with Jesse Luketa at Penn State, walking around with Jesse Luketa at Penn State. He was giving us the tour of everything. And just, you could tell by the way people engaged with him as he walked around, what a special kind of presence he had at that school, as a team captain and a guy who just given everything to that program. I often tell the story that we sent a list to Penn State when we were doing a feature on Jesse Luketa that, big list, right? Can we get James Franklin for a sit down? Can we get access to the stadium? Can we get access to a meeting room with a screen? Like a whole bunch of things. And I got the list back and it said, yes, no, yes, maybe, no, yes. I called Jesse and I said, hey, could you put in a bit of a word with us on some of our requests here? Because we got a lot of maybes on this. And the next day I got an email and everything was green lit. And it was just like, it just showed me, what kind of standing he had at that school. So I have noticed some real consistencies when it comes to certainly the Canadians that are getting to the NCAA level.
So when you were visiting those particular individuals that you're talking about, we were just before the NIL revolution. We were just before the shuffling around of conferences. If you were to take a look at the landscape of college football, and let's throw U Sports in with it too.
Sure.
If you're trying to explain it to someone who doesn't understand the college football landscape, be a cartographer, right? Draw a map for people. What would the map look like these days? And how many more of these borders can change, not only for conferences and programs, but for players as well? Because we're in the middle right now of a bit of a whirlwind, aren't we?
Well, the way I describe it to people, Jim, is I say college football went from the most restrictive system of free agency, basically in major competitive sport, to the least restrictive, and I think that has such a dramatic effect when you basically have a sport where to transfer out, you got to sit out a year and you got to really think about your future. And yeah, it happened, but as quickly, and I've noticed it even covering the Canadian Football League in such a short period of time, we see players coming here, and the first thing I'll do is look up their college pedigree. Where did they play? What did they do? And the number of guys who have shown up here with 3 colleges on their resumes, and you go, holy smokes, and you've seen that even with some of the Canadians. Look at a kid like Christian Veilleux, right, who's Penn State. He goes to Pitt. He gets his opportunity at Pitt. I was there the day he threw 4 interceptions at Notre Dame. And unfortunately, in this sport, this is one of the things I love about the sport. But occasionally, I don't like it. You get your opportunity. You get your 4 or 5 starts. If you don't make good of it, they're going to move on to somebody else, and that's what happened with him. But the way I would describe it is basically, you have the ability to plot your own path. And I know there's things people don't like about NIL and all the movement and things like that. I can't get past the fact that I think for players it's a good thing, as opposed to being stuck with a coach who maybe you're not the guy you're not his guy, or while you're there the coach changes and you say, hey, I came here to play for that guy, not for that guy, and the coach can go out the back door at the end of a college season, but a player can't, or just getting stuck behind playing second string behind a guy who's not coming off the field and he's only a year ahead of you, or he might even be in the same year. I do love the flexibility that it gives players because, you don't get that situation where you're just burning the clock. But I mean, it has become. I mean, it's really hard to say what college football is right now because I feel like it's still in transition. I mean, we're heading towards the first 12-team playoff. I don't even know what that's going to look like. Is that going to be competitive, or are the early rounds of that not going to be competitive? Because we often see such a drop off. Once you get past the top 4 or 5 teams. But look, I think college football today is a sport where there are opportunities for players, both in terms of compensation and in terms of where they want to play and find themselves, like there have never been. It's gone from a sport where the players are really not in the driver's seat. They've been in the back seat, and now they're driving.
Can two individuals have more of an effect on football in Canada than the Rourke brothers coming up in the next couple of years? Nathan in the CFL, we know there's some turbulence there around the Lions, but I expect him to pull out of that. He's got a good body of work. And Curtis being mentioned as a top 5 Heisman candidate. It's too bad he's got that thumb injury that is going to force him to sit out against Washington. Both of these guys have the opportunity to make a seismic impact on this game in this country, don't you think?
Well, we can say already there's never been, brother tandem like that in Canadian football history, unless we're going back into the mists of time, But look, how long have we just talked about Canadian quarterbacks? Could we have one? One who was, and I'm not trying to knock guys like Bob Torrance or Larry Gistanis or guys who rose up and got opportunities to start, Julio Caravata. But I'm talking about that you would get a guy who's going to be a 5, 8, 10-year starter in the league. He's gonna be in competition for outstanding player. He's going to play in Grey Cups, and nobody's going to question his abilities because he's Canadian. And I think that was what was so interesting about Nathan Rourke in 2022. I'll put my hand up. I was one of those who was critical that offseason of the Lions making him their starter. Nothing to do with him being Canadian. I was just going from saying, hey, in all the years I've been watching Canadian football, I have not seen many guys play one season, get 2 starts, and be ready to be a starting quarterback in this league. That's just not a common path. And, if you wanted to broaden it a little bit, give me the list of guys from the Mid-American Conference who have come and taken this league by storm within a couple of years. It's just not something we've seen a lot. And the way Nathan Rourke played in 2022, he eliminated that conversation. And I had a great talk with Rick Campbell about week 2 or 3 of that season, where he kind of walked me through all the reasons why they did it. And I came away from that, with a much greater understanding that I had in the off season. The fascinating thing about Curtis Rourke is, I've had a chance to talk to their parents and find out a little bit of their upbringing. I mean, Nathan was the dog, right? Nathan was the one who football was always going to be his future from the moment, literally. I don't know if you guys know the story about him in the videotape.
Yeah,
You know the story?
I do, but you can share it with everyone here.
Yeah, real quickly. Nathan Rourke found a videotape, like in his father's closet, of the Green Bay Packers 1997 championship season. And his mother had a rule: the kids could watch 30 minutes of TV a day. You could watch Sesame Street, you could watch cartoons, you could watch, whatever you want. You could watch, but you get 30 minutes a day. Nathan watched the Packer highlight tape every single day. Every single day. He didn't want to watch kid stuff. He watched that. I mean, that's how early this was embedded in him as a dream that he was going to play professional football. He's literally a toddler when this is happening. And Curtis kind of followed Big Brother. And then, Curtis grew to 6'5", after he got to college. And I think it's a really interesting question about whether Curtis, as a high school quarterback in Oakville, Ontario, would have got an opportunity to be a D1, to go to a D1 school, had people not just known his brother, but known the family and kind of known the whole background and the kind of commitment you were going to get from this player. But to see where he is now, and I talked to him, actually 7 days ago today. I had a good conversation with him, just coming out of their bye week. I got to see him in August when I was there visiting. He's a very calm guy. He rolls with the stuff, with the things that come in this sport. I'm sure he's handling the latest injury, the way he's learned to deal with the ups and downs of the sport. But I mean, look, I was optimistic for him. I remember last year I talked to him. I saw him play at the University of Buffalo. I think it was in November because it was darn cold. I remember that. And at that time, he was still leaning against playing again, that was going to be the end of his college football career. He gets the 6th season because of the COVID season in 20. And he told me a week ago, he said, looking back on that, I said, how close did you come from walking away from this and just taking your chances in the pros? He said, pretty close. And when he put his name in the portal, he said, I wasn't even sure anybody was going to want me coming out of the portal at that time. So, he caught lightning in a bottle with Kurt Signetti and this program at Indiana. They've caught lightning in a bottle with Curtis Rourke. And I'm so disappointed because this next month was going to be tons of attention on that program, trying to stay undefeated, going up against Michigan, Washington, Ohio State. I know we expect he's going to be back before the end of the year, but what a duo to see these guys in the same season. Curtis being in the NCAA, Nathan in both the NFL and the CFL. My goodness, Jim, I visited Nathan in July at Giants camp. That feels like 3 years ago. It doesn't feel like that was this season, but unprecedented. And look, Nathan's 26 and Curtis is 24. There's a lot of their story in football still to be written.
Speaking of things that are written, I want to ask you a bit about the industry, actually, because I was raised on newspapers and radio. I went into newspapers and radio myself, similar to you. I was raised on, in my local papers, Jim Taylor, Archie McDonald, even Cam Cole as he came over from Edmonton. And each CFL city used to have those voices, used to have that level of literacy around the game. That's disappearing. How much does that hurt the storytelling and the landscape that the sport needs to have eyes, attention, and engagement with it, in your mind?
I think it's a major thing, and I actually brought this up at the commissioner's address last year at the Grey Cup, because it's not the Canadian Football League's fault. I mean, it's not like people have lost interest in football. It's that the media landscape has changed so dramatically, and there are fewer people covering sports. And so the biggest properties, NHL in this country, NHL, NBA in Toronto, sort of the NHL across the country in 7 markets, that's where newspapers and media outlets are putting their resources and saying, even sports like Toronto FC, aren't getting, daily coverage or a lot of times because that's Major League Soccer, but it's down the totem pole in terms of where these sports rank. And look, I have been at a lot of CFL venues where I'm the only guy, or there's the team reporter is there as well, which is teams have started hiring their own reporters, not so much to control the message, but just to make sure there's somebody there covering them and putting out a message. So I do think this is a major source of concern. And I think it's something the league may have to take more ownership on as we go along here. And, it's funny because I comment my friend Steve Simmons of the Toronto Sun, who is, a longtime CFL guy, grew up at the knee of his father, who was an Argo diehard. And Steve was at the Argos last week writing a Wynton McManus column. And I said to him, you're basically the only one in mainstream media writing a national column on the CFL ever. Like I don't think everything else that's coming out about the league is coming out locally, but nationally, it's Steve Simmons and no one right now in this country, other than again, the broadcast partners, TSN, are writing those kinds of things. But I'm talking about media that doesn't have a business relationship with the league, and that is I think very scary, and it's happened very fast.
Is there a solution to it? Does the league have to take ownership of it? If I take a look at Quebec, for example, one of the reasons why there is success at the college level in Quebec is that in each of those towns, there's still reporters covering college football on a daily basis in those places. How can the league in English Canada offset this outside of the outstanding job that TSN does, of course?
Well, and I'll give you a shout out to 3 Down Nation as well, as a website that covers the minutiae and the daily of the CFL. And a lot of their people are doing things on a part-time basis. They're not full-time sports writers, but they are certainly filling a niche right now in this country. So I certainly give them some measure of respect. Look, I think, I do have an idea about this one. And if I was, retiring, which I'm not, hopefully not, it's the kind of thing I think somebody should do. And that is, I think you need a website basically called, CFLreporting.ca or CFLbeats.ca, and hire beat writers in all those cities, where the league might have to again, one thing about what's happened to journalism, there's no shortage of really talented young people who want to work in this business that you wouldn't have to pay a ton of money to, at least out of the gate. And I think I could certainly see, like, if you asked me to, and you did ask me the question, solve this problem, I would say I think you have 9 beat writers, and there's some versions of this already happening when you look at what, say, Ed Tate does in Winnipeg. That's pretty close to an in-house beat writer writing it very traditionally, kind of the way he did all the years when he was at either the Winnipeg Sun or the Winnipeg Free Press. But I think you need that presence in every market. And and hey, the league can turn this, even if they don't make money off it. If they with advertising and the revenue you can generate through media, even if you could just break even, or I think the investment would be worth it for the league to have somebody at practice every day, having somebody at a team 3 days a week, giving that beat coverage, writing about the players, telling their stories. Again, a lot of the 9 CFL teams do this to different degrees. But I mean, I think there would be certainly a case to be made that you could create a central hub for that, where it's nothing but CFL beat writing, in the traditional sense, the sense that you and I grew up on, and the sense that I think we all miss. And I've noticed it, Jim, just even when I haven't done a lot of CFL game panels this year, but the 2 years previous to this, I did a lot of them. And, I'd sit down a lot of times. Okay, this is Calgary playing Edmonton. Let me sit down and on my computer, and there's not that many stories from the week out of Calgary and Edmonton about these teams. So even for people in broadcast, trying to rely on the local beat writer sometimes for coverage and information, that information isn't there.
Dave, before I let you go, Cornish Trophy, will you be a voter this year?
I absolutely will. Would love to.
There you go. We'll bring you back around the table again. Thanks very much for this. Thanks for taking time out in the middle of what looks like an extended summer in Ontario.
Yeah, we are second half of October and living large on the weather here, no question. Thanks, Jim.